On the night before the battle, Samuel Whitaker wrote a letter his family would discover only many years after his death. Its opening lines said nothing about courage, victory, or glory. They spoke of fear. "My dearest Eleanor, if this letter has reached your hands, perhaps the ocean decided that I would not return home. Do not let our children believe that their father died without wanting to live. I have never wanted life as desperately as I do tonight." Samuel stopped writing when he heard footsteps above his head. The planks of the USS Constitution groaned beneath the weight of the men crossing the deck. Outside, the Atlantic looked like an endless black field. There were no birds, trees, fences, or lights from distant homes. There was only water, wind, and the feeling that somewhere in that darkness an enemy ship might be searching for them. He dipped his pen into the small inkwell and continued. "Before I tell you what happened, I must confess something. Throughout this voyage, I told the other men that I was not afraid. It was a lie. I felt fear when I woke, whenever I heard an order, and every time I looked toward the horizon. But today I understood that a man can be afraid and still remain where he is needed." This is a fictional story inspired by real events from the War of 1812. It is the story of an ordinary man, a letter hidden for decades, and a promise that nearly sank to the bottom of the sea. Stay until the end, because the final passage of Samuel's letter reveals the true reason he found the strength to return home. Before the war, Samuel could not have identified a frigate on the horizon. He knew the weight of a hoe, the smell of soil after rain, and the sound of corn leaves whispering when the wind crossed the fields. His entire life fit within a few acres, a wooden house, and a table where Eleanor divided the bread among their children. He did not dream of medals. He dreamed of expanding the barn and teaching his son how to guide a plow, but the war found its way into that simple life. The news spoke of captured American ships and a young nation facing the most powerful navy in the world. Samuel did not understand every argument being shouted in the taverns. He understood only that fear had already reached the ports and the homes of ordinary families. When he decided to leave, Eleanor did not pretend to be strong. She wept in front of him. "The farm needs you," she said. Samuel looked at their sleeping children and answered, "The farm is the reason I must go. If every man waits for someone else to protect what we love, one day no one will stand between our home and those who wish to decide our fate." When Samuel boarded the USS Constitution, he discovered a world built from ropes, sails, gunpowder, discipline, and timber. The ship seemed alive. She breathed when the sails filled, leaned her body into the waves, and groaned as though speaking to the men during the darkest hours of the night. Samuel was assigned to a gun crew. For 2 weeks under the command of Captain Isaac Hull, the crew repeated their drills every day. Each movement had to become instinct. In battle, a few seconds could mean the difference between an accurate shot and a grave beneath the ocean. At night, Samuel closed his eyes and did not see the ship. He saw the farm. He pictured Eleanor gathering clothes before the rain, Thomas chasing the chickens, and Mary asking when her father would come home. He imagined the plow beside the barn, waiting for him as faithfully as the family he had left behind. On August 19, 1812, shortly after noon, a cry descended from high in the rigging, "Sail in sight." The effect was immediate. Men who had been talking fell silent. Others rushed to their stations. On the horizon, a shape slowly rose above the water. HMS Guerriere, a British frigate commanded by Captain James Richard Dacre. Samuel watched the distance between the ships shrink. Guerriere did not look like a mere vessel. She looked like the full weight and reputation of the Royal Navy advancing toward them. Britain ruled the seas, and many Americans believed that a United States frigate had little chance of surviving a direct confrontation. Samuel's fear was no longer an idea. It became something physical, tightening his stomach and drying his mouth. He touched the inside pocket of his shirt, where he kept a small piece of blue cloth cut from one of Eleanor's dresses. Before his departure, she had placed it in his hand and told him that whenever he felt lost, he should hold it and remember that a road home still existed. The crews prepared the guns. Powder charges were carried with extreme care. Buckets of water stood ready to extinguish fires. Sand was scattered across the deck so the men would not slip when blood began to flow. Then came the first explosions. Guerriere opened fire from a distance. The blast rolled across the ocean like thunder. Samuel heard the cannonballs whistling through the air and saw columns of white water rising around Constitution. The men asked permission to return fire. Captain Hull refused. The distance was still too great. He would not waste their first broadside. For Samuel, waiting was worse than being attacked. His body begged him to run, but he remained at his station, gripping his tool so tightly that all color disappeared from his fingers. "I thought of you at that moment," the letter said. "I did not think of flags or any of the speeches we heard before leaving. I thought of your hands covered in flour and the way you blew out the candle before going to sleep. That was when I understood. I was not there because I loved war. I was there because I loved something the war could destroy." Constitution moved closer. The wind drove the smoke between the ships. As the frigates drew alongside each other, Samuel could see the faces of the British sailors. They were not monsters. They were men. Some looked as young as his son would be in only a few years. Samuel imagined that one of them might also have a farm, a wife, and a letter hidden beneath his shirt. Then the order came. Fire. Constitution's side vanished behind a wall of smoke. The guns recoiled violently, and the deck shook beneath Samuel's feet. They hauled the cannon back, swabbed the barrel, loaded another charge, and pushed the weapon out again. His body worked while his mind struggled not to understand what was happening around him. An enemy ball smashed into the timber above them. Splinters flew like knives. A sailor named Josiah fell near Samuel, wounded in the shoulder. Samuel wanted to help him, but he was ordered to remain with the gun. Another man dragged Josiah away. The second shot was ready. Fire. More smoke. More screams. More timber breaking apart. When British cannonballs struck Constitution's hull, some bounced away or lodged in the dense oak. A sailor cried out that the ship's sides seemed to be made of iron. In the midst of that chaos, a name was born that would endure for centuries. Old Ironsides. But Samuel saw nothing indestructible around him. Men were bleeding. The air reeked of gunpowder and burning wood. Death was there among them, choosing its victims at random. The frigates moved even closer. Their structures collided and became entangled for a moment. Marines fired from high in the rigging. Boarding parties were called. Lieutenant William Sharpbush prepared to cross onto the enemy ship, but he was struck and killed before he could complete the attempt. When Samuel learned that an officer had fallen, one thought pierced his mind. No one was protected by rank, experience, or promises made on shore. The next man could be anyone. At that moment, an impact threw Samuel to the deck. He landed on his back, unable to breathe. He touched his chest and believed he had been hit. Beneath his shirt, he found the piece of blue cloth pinned by a splinter of wood. The fragment had stopped against a small metal medallion Eleanor had sewn beside the keepsake. He was not badly wounded. For several seconds, Samuel remained motionless. A shipmate shouted his name. Through the smoke, he imagined he could hear Eleanor repeating the words she had spoken before he left. "There is still a road home." Samuel rose to his feet. At that moment, he wrote, "I did not become braver. I merely understood that I was still alive, and every second of life carried a responsibility. If I abandoned my station, another man might not return to his family. So I stood up, not because my fear was gone, but because fear was no longer the only voice inside me." If you appreciate stories that uncover the human lives behind history's greatest ships, subscribe to the channel. Here, history is not told only through dates and battles, but through the ordinary people who carried dreams, loss, and hope within them. Constitution's guns tore through Guerrière's masts and rigging. The British frigate lost her ability to maneuver. When the British colors were finally lowered, Samuel did not celebrate. Some men shouted with joy. Others simply stared at the enemy ship and understood the price of victory. Guerrière was too badly damaged to be taken as a prize. The following morning, after the survivors had been transferred, she was set on fire. To Samuel, she looked like a burning house in the middle of the ocean. He thought of the British families who would wait for men who would never return. "Eleanor, we won," he wrote. "But a victory seen from this close looks nothing like the paintings. There is no music. There is no beauty in the faces of the dead. There are only survivors trying to understand why they are still breathing." Constitution turned toward Boston. Samuel helped clean the deck. The blood disappeared from the planks, but it did not disappear from his memory. At night, he finished the letter by the uncertain light of a lamp. Afraid he might still die before reaching the coast, he entrusted the pages to a wounded shipmate who was expected to go ashore first. On August 30th, Constitution reached Boston. Crowds filled the waterfront, waving handkerchiefs and celebrating the ship that had stood against the mighty Royal Navy. Samuel searched for only one face. Eleanor was not at the harbor. She had remained on the farm, not knowing exactly when he would return. Samuel declined the celebrations, collected his pay, and began the journey home as soon as he received permission. Along the road, he imagined grand words for their reunion. But when he finally saw the small house, and Eleanor appeared in the doorway, he could not say anything. She ran to him. Samuel held her and wept with his face buried in her hair. Their children wrapped their arms around his legs. Thomas asked whether his father had won the war. Samuel knelt, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and answered, "No, I only managed to come home." He returned to the fields, repaired the fence, and planted corn. When neighbors asked for heroic stories, he said very little. He placed the blue cloth and the scarred medallion inside a wooden box. The years passed. His children grew. Samuel grew old beside Eleanor, just as he had dreamed during the dark nights on the Atlantic. But he never showed the letter to anyone. Decades later, after Samuel had died, Eleanor found the envelope hidden beneath a false bottom in the box. He had passed away in his own bed, surrounded by family, after spending the rest of his life as a farmer. When Eleanor opened the letter, she discovered that its pages had not all been written during the battle. Many years later, Samuel had added one final passage. It was the part no one had ever known. "My dearest Eleanor, for a long time I believed the piece of your dress and that little medallion had saved my life. Today, I know it was not the metal that brought me back. The splinter could have struck a few inches higher. A mast could have fallen on me. The ocean could have chosen a different fate. What saved me in that moment was remembering that I belonged somewhere. Men can endure terrible things when they believe a home is waiting for them. I stood because I could still imagine damp earth between my fingers, our children beside the fire, and you standing in the doorway. My true country was not a word written on a flag. It was everything that flag promised to protect. The chance to return to our table, cultivate our land, and raise our children without kneeling before fear. If they ever ask whether I was brave, do not tell them that I felt no fear. Tell them the truth. Tell them I was so frightened that I could barely stand, but also tell them that I thought of them. And I stood." Eleanor finished reading in silence. Then she carried the letter to the window. Outside, Samuel's grandchildren were running through the same fields he had dreamed of seeing again. Only then did she understand what victory had truly meant to him. It was not the cheering in Boston. It was not the name earned by USS Constitution. It was not the enemy ship burning on the horizon. It was that simple scene. Children running across free land, unaware of how much fear one man had faced, so he could return home and cultivate it. USS Constitution would enter history as Old Ironsides. Her victory over HMS Guerriere would restore hope to a young nation. But behind the guns, sails, and flags were men like Samuel, men who did not wish to conquer the world. They wanted only to protect the small world they called home. Perhaps this is the part of war that monuments rarely reveal. Courage does not grow only from love of country. Often it grows from the smell of bread in a kitchen, the sound of a sleeping child, a field waiting for the next harvest, and someone who promised to remain at the door until you returned. If this story touched you, write in the comments the name of someone who represents your road home. Share this video with a person who needs to remember that feeling afraid is not the same as being a coward. Samuel Whitaker does not appear in the records of USS Constitution. He and his letter were created for this story, inspired by the real men who stood on that deck on August 19, 1812. Men who faced smoke, splinters, and uncertainty. Some returned, others remained at sea forever, but the emotional truth contained in this fictional letter belongs to every generation. A man does not have to stop being afraid to fulfill his duty. Sometimes, he only needs to remember who is waiting for him on the other side of the ocean.